My name is Dr. Manuel Direji. I coordinate or I direct the African Higher Education Program that is run by Trust Africa. Trust Africa is an African-based foundation that is based in Senegal, Dakar. It works across the continent on issues of equitable development, governance, and philanthropy. From the 80s, the African higher education sector faced a serious bashing as a consequence of the neglect of the sector, primarily for two main reasons. The World Bank at the time indicated that Africans do not really require higher education, and the focus was on primary and secondary school education. So in comparative terms, the African higher education sector cannot really meet the requirement of the 21st century compared to those of North America and Asia. So it is a sector that is in a serious crisis in terms of investment, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of staff, students ratio, in terms of poor research output. So there are a number of challenges that confront the sector that requires urgent attention now. There is issue of social deficit, lack of trust between all the social partners. There is the issue of the dominance of the policy terrain up to now by predominantly government and Western institutions or international institutions. But there are problems of issue of access and equity. There's a huge demand for higher education on the sector. Remember, the continent have a huge youth bulge. So as a consequence, there's a very high demand for higher education. We do not really have enough universities and other tertiary institutions to meet those demands. Then there are issues of equity in terms of gender, in terms of rural, urban, in terms of urban, rural, in terms of and the inequality that we talked about, on the continent is actually amplified himself in the higher education sector, where children of the poor are unable to access higher education. Then when you also look at the staff complement in terms of qualification, you have a situation where in some universities you have only 3 people with PhDs. That is a serious abnormality. And it is a product of the fact that our higher education system is not producing the requisite high-level people to populate and run the higher education sectors. So there are huge challenges, including, as I indicated, investment, including poor research output, and the poor research output have huge consequences because we are not able, if you take Ebola, for example, or if you take malaria, African universities are not leading the research to be able to develop vaccine in those areas. So the poor research output impact negatively on our development outcome. It is something that needs to be addressed and needs to be addressed now. The African Higher Education Summit arose as a consequence of the factors I alluded to earlier. Because of the neglect of the sector, because of the absence of social dialogue, because of the lack of coordination, of the desperate intervention by a range of stakeholders, African stakeholders, international stakeholders, African government, African businesses, All of these things are not being coordinated. So Trust Africa led a process of consultation on the continent. The summit seek to ensure that we'll develop new method of teaching research to ensure that the sector is more relevant. And a crucial variable is that the summit want to also address is the issue of the high level of graduate or unemployability. There are a number of graduates that are not employable. And some of the factors of that is both external and internal. External factors relate to the African labor market, but there are internal factors that are peculiar to the African higher education sector that have contributed to that factor. So we will need to be able to come out from that summit addressing, seeking solutions so that we do not have graduates that are unemployable. We hope that ultimately that the summit will be able to come up with such an agenda. But in addition to that, we need our graduates to be able to start businesses rather than just seeking for jobs. So we hope that the summit will be able to reinforce our common humanity. There needs to be some basic values that every graduate should be able to imbibe. The future of Africa depends on a higher education sector that is driven by excellence, that have high quality output, and that is relevant to the needs of the continent in the 21st century. So Africa, this is your summit. Own it, become its ambassador, and in your respective role, support the transformation of the sector.
And time for another quick break, guys. But when we come back, we'll share our trivia question. Don't go anywhere.